All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar From Draft to Filing How AI is Reshaping Capital Markets. I'm Jason McBride, partner at AX Ventures, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. For decades, the process of preparing regulatory filings, managing disclosures, and coordinating across legal, finance, and investor relation teams has been highly manual, time consuming, and expensive. Today, AI is beginning to transform that process from drafting and disclosure review to benchmarking and final filing. What's particularly interesting is that AI isn't simply helping teams work faster, it's also changing how information is created, analyzed, validated, and communicated. The result has the potential to improve efficiency, reduce risk, enhance accuracy, and ultimately allow professionals to spend more time on judgment and strategy rather than administrative tasks. For today's conversation, we'll explore how organizations are applying AI across the capital market workflows, where the technology is delivering value today, what challenges still remain, and how practitioners should think about the future of these tools to continue to evolve. We're fortunate to be joined by an outstanding group of experts who are working at the forefront of this transformation. First, we're joined by Peyton McCoy, founder and CEO of Greenshoe. Greenshoe is building a disclosure intelligence platform that helps public companies and law firms monitor, review, and improve securities disclosures. Prior to founding the company, Peyton practiced capital markets and technology transactions law at both Skadden and Kirkland and Ellis, where he worked directly on the disclosure and reporting processes the public companies navigate every day. We're also joined by Aaron Briggs, partner at Gibson Dunn, where he advises public companies and boards of directors on securities regulations, corporate governance, SEC compliance, shareholder engagement, executive compensation, and disclosure strategy. Before Gibson Dunn, Aaron served as executive counsel at General Electric, giving him a unique perspective on both the legal and operational realities of public company reporting. And finally, we're joined by Colleen Honingsberg, Associate Dean of Curriculum and Professor of Law at Stanford Law School. Colleen is one of the leading academic experts on corporate governance, securities regulation, accounting, and financial disclosure. Her research has been published in top academic journals and featured in publications including The Economist, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. She also serves on the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board Standards and Emerging Issue Advisory Group and previously served on the SEC's Investor Advisory Committee. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's jump right in with the very first question, which is that every public company is under pressure to now do more with less while maintaining compliance and accuracy. Why is SEC reporting such a compelling area for AI right now? Aaron, we'd love to get your thoughts. Let's start with you.
Sure. Well, it's a repeatable work stream, and it has a number of interesting aspects that involve deep analysis, critical judgment, and sensitive positioning on certain disclosure issues. But it also encompasses a lot of other tasks that some might characterize as more rote or a chore, and you have to go through it every quarter. It doesn't stop. So I think it's an area ripe for disruption right now.
Well said.
Uh,
Pete?
um, no, I agree. And to add on to that, I think one of the unique things about reporting is that there are a lot of things happening in real time that will affect how an issuer is going to put together their disclosures. There are lots of things to react to. So I think we're at a time now where AI systems can kind of continuously monitor these events, whether they're events that happen at an issuer's peer companies or whether there are events that happen in the regulatory space. Especially now we're having lots of new updates there. So you have kind of this continuous expectation to analyze lots and lots of data, and I think that's something that AI is getting pretty good at.
To follow up on that, what are some of the biggest complexities you see in disclosure prep today? Like, what are the main pain points?
Sure. I mean, I can start. I think there are a couple. One is just managing the sheer number of considerations that should be going into these disclosures, some of which Peyton mentioned. You're thinking about consistency with prior company statements. What are your peers doing? What's the broader market doing? What does the SEC require? What does the SEC staff, how are they interpreting those requirements now? You're managing litigation risk. You're thinking about business considerations around your own strategy and the desire to keep certain information confidential. And you're thinking about the overall business in an macroeconomic environment. And so it's just so complex in terms of the number of factors that go into these disclosures that I think AI can really help with. And then the other aspect I think of as being, pretty complex is just accounting for again, the number of different stakeholders who are going to be reading the disclosure, both in terms of the review process and then also once it's publicly available. So, right, for the review process, you need to get it through your disclosure committee, your CEO, your CFO, the other senior leadership team members, your audit committee, the board, your auditors, possibly underwriters council if you're doing a deal. And all of those folks are going to have different perspectives and angles on what they think should be included or not. And then, of course, once it's public, you have so many different audience perspectives that you're thinking about, right? You have sell-side analysts, institutional investors, retail holders, the press, employees, your customers. And so you have to think about it through so many different lenses. So I think those two areas, make it really complex.
Yeah, that's great insight. I was going to double click on that. So obviously, we see the advancements in AI. We see the complexities around disclosures. Um, how does that impact client expectations? Like, what are the expectations of the client? They see the value there, but they also still see the complexity. So so if you can sort of think through, like, how have the expectations of the client changed over the last couple of years, especially with the proliferation of AI?
I can speak to that first, at least in terms of kind of the public companies that we work with. Um, I think the public companies that we work with, they're always asking, and I think AI is obviously a buzzword right now, and everyone's talking about AI. I think the issuers want to understand, like, well, how are my advisors using AI? Like, is it helping us? Those kinds of things. And I think it's really difficult to solve for right now because there's just so many different AI tools out there. So it's hard to kind of drill down and figure out which ones are actually giving an issuer the most value. But I think once the dust settles, I think there will be really good processes in place that allow you know all of the relevant information that you would need to put disclosures together. That would allow that to be set up in such that folks are really focused on exercising judgment, which is, at the end of the day, that's probably the most important part of putting disclosures together, is the judgment calls. So if we can have systems that are designed to get to the judgment, I think that's where we want to be.
That's really good feedback. I wanted to zoom out for a second because obviously there's advancements in AI, but when you zoom out, you have to think about the regulatory landscape, regulations that could come down the pipe and impact how we actually use these advancements. So I wanted to turn it over to Colleen. There's been growing discussion in Washington around how AI should be regulated in capital markets. From your perspective, what are some of the considerations policymakers should be thinking about as they evaluate potential regulatory frameworks for AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we can think about first Congress and then second the SEC. So in conversations that I've had with Congress, I will say I do feel that there's a little bit more fear in DC than we have here in Silicon Valley. And I think there's a significant concern that we're going to have actors who evade, what would currently be, 10b5 type behavior by using AI. And they want to be sure that that does not happen. So, for example, there's a draft bill that I saw recently that I hope will be revised before it actually gets proposed. But that draft bill had said any use of AI, where the AI was defined very, very broadly, an agent was also defined very broadly, would result in a finding of scienter. And so you don't need to meet that element anymore. And if that were to happen, you're essentially collapsing a lot into strict liability. And because AI was very broadly defined with that, it would be a lot of these tools that people rely on, maybe from a external party, because they're not all going to be internally developed. Then you have to rely on that. You have to trust it, adopt it. And then what if something goes wrong and you're liable? So I think that idea, I understand the fear. I think we do need to ensure that if it's currently a violation today, it remains a violation, and you can't evade that by relying on some sort of tool, and relying on agents or Gen AI or whatever it is. At the same time, I would be very hesitant to overregulate. because I do think there's incredible potential to, improve accuracy, to be more efficient, to reduce costs. So from, Congress's perspective, my hope is that they sort of acknowledge the issue and say, we need to ensure that, investors are protected the same way they are today. And then they throw it to the SEC, because the SEC actually has that expertise, and they just say, this is what we want you to focus on. We want you to actually, make the rules. So that would be my hope. And I think with this version of the SEC, we have a chairman who wants to make IPOs great again and bring everybody back to the public markets. And so, my hope is that we will get some sort of regulatory sandboxes, a little bit more flexibility, consultations with various divisions so that people can say, this is what I want to do. This is the technology I want to use. Can I? And that hopefully we have that pathway to allow for some of this innovation.
That's great feedback. I was going to sort of turn it over to Peyton really quickly. Peyton, in your discussion with customers, does that ever come up? Like obviously this is a living, breathing thing, right? So regulations are going to happen. What are some of the questions that you typically get when, for example, you're sort of having that preliminary engagement with the customer?
Yeah, so this does come up quite a bit, and I think a lot of it kind of relates, at least on the product side, it relates to kind of the human in the loop nature of how you might build a product or how you might build a workflow. One thing we try to do is we try to eliminate situations where the AI is doing something that is like doing it in a sneaky way to where like someone isn't able to actually review it. Um, like we do the opposite. Like we design the software so that you almost have to review it before you can even move forward to the next step, right? So I think those are the kinds of things that you might want to look for in the software that you're buying. So that and another thing is, I think we've seen a lot of these kind of AI judgment issues happening in court cases. I think that's like those are the first examples because it's like you have AI write a case brief and it hallucinates a case and then you submit it to court. That's like really bad. It's hard. It's harder to do that with a disclosure because of the different levels of review, and you're not putting in citations to your disclosure unless you're actually like the legal proceedings part of a disclosure, maybe. But so I think there's ways to build protections into the platform so that doesn't happen, can't happen, or at least is like extremely unlikely to happen.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. I was going to turn it over to Aaron and sort of see what I know you're shaking your head, Aaron. I want to get your thoughts, but also want to know, like, in your opinion, based on what Peyton just said, where does human judgment remain most critical in the disclosure process? Because there's a lot to consider if you're using these tools.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously it's about, kind of materiality judgments, right? That is something I wouldn't turn over to AI. That remains critical for the human to be involved in. It's the underpinnings of our SEC reporting system. Most disclosure rule requirements won't have a nice, clean, quantitative threshold in it. It'll be up to lawyers and accountants and others to make judgment calls as to what's material. And so I think AI can certainly help with the inputs in the analysis. But at the end of the day, the humans are making the decision. And just kind of really interesting the conversation so far and kind of the draft bill with the Congress. And, it's kind of a question of, do we think AI is going to make disclosures better for investors or worse? And I think of it as, as long as humans are staying in the loop, as Peyton mentioned, and kind of can verify the output and know how the AI got there and then make the final judgment call, I think it's ultimately going to be better. It kind of makes us better at our jobs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's a delicate balancing act. And it goes back to, I think, what would be sort of the gold standard for a lot of these tools. I do believe it's human in the loop, because I think even if the agents can do a lot of the heavy lifting, there's that gray area where you need the subject matter expertise for that work product. So that makes a lot of sense. Wanted to pivot to Colleen, back to Colleen. What do you think about that in particular? Like, which reporting activities do you think are most suitable for AI? And maybe talk about the ones you think should be off limits.
Yeah. So first, I will say when I focus more on the accounting side, so both internal and external. And I think there is a huge opportunity here is for better coordination between the company, the auditor, and we can have sort of a more continuous process that is not just at the end of the reporting period. So I think there's huge potential. At the same time, what I am seeing is a lot of variation by company, and a lot of that is dependent on the data quality of the company. So if you're at a company with really, good internal data structure, maybe you can automate some of your internal controls, and you can really improve that process. And I think there's a lot of potential there, especially with the SEC eliminating internal control requirements for a lot of companies. Well, so maybe then we can substitute in a cheaper cost alternative that is still actually effective. At the same time, if you don't have good governance of those internal controls and you don't have a good data system to set that up, I think, one, you do run the risk that it's not as simple as just looking. I think when you're dealing with all of the accounting information, it's not as simple as just validating the output of like the earnings release. So there is going to be more risk, more human involvement, and a kind of slower process, especially at companies that have, just lower data quality at this point in time. On the external side, I think this is where a lot of the tools that I'm seeing so far are more of like a wrapper and maybe help things a little bit here and there, but aren't really updating the workflows. So I taught an AI and accounting class last quarter, and there were a couple really, really interesting early stage companies that I think actually could significantly improve coordination between your external auditor and your company that function. But it's going to take us a while to get there. And again, we've got some regulatory friction because for example, I spoke with one company that uses agentic AI in their internal controls. Well, their external auditor won't sign off on it.
Yeah.
So, there's a little way to go.
That's interesting. I mean, I think there are a lot of unknowns, some of which will be solved over time, obviously. But you're right. I think part of the balancing act is working with all internal parties to make sure the security underpinnings are addressed, all of those issues. So I guess just to sort of double click on that a little bit further, um, what makes like AI assisted output trustworthy and defensible in a regulated workflow? Colleen, I know you've seen a lot of workflows, but could you give it maybe an example of something that, in your opinion, is the gold standard so
Yeah.
far?
So Microsoft, for example, has done a lot of work in their internal controls. And they really spent a lot of time trying to go from here are principles of responsible AI governance to how we actually operationalize
Right.
those principles. And I think that's what you want everybody to do. I think it is a real struggle at this point in time because people don't have great guidance. We don't necessarily have a great view of exactly what internal governance of AI should look like. So, but I would say really focusing on those individual processes, rolling them out slowly, checking and double clicking on every single thing you do before, it actually goes further, making sure that you have a human monitoring everything, starting with some of the processes that are much easier to automate. There's a lengthy procedure that will take time to actually operationalize. But, I don't think it's an easy process, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And just a quick kind of addition to that, this is less with public companies, but there are smaller companies and companies that don't have as much scrutiny, plugging in lots of their data, their financial data, confidential data into kind of certain tools that promise to like run an entire process for you, and you don't even really know what's happening. And for some, for some folks, that's great. I've even experimented just on like personal tasks, admin stuff for my own life. kind of scary because you just give it to an AI and it does it. There's been stories of AI going out and buying things for people and spending like $5,000 without them knowing. That's like the extreme, but it's good to bring up because you don't want that kind of lack of control to extend to the obligations that a public company has. So I agree with you, Colleen. Like it has to be very structured, and the move from principles and guidelines to operationalizing that is super important for public companies and law firms, accounting firms.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really
and I would just add from my perspective, so kind of on the outside counsel side, less on the accounting side, but more in kind of crafting the disclosures. I think, what makes it trustworthy, it's just like working with a junior attorney on the team, right? You need to be able to verify where the output came from, right? Ask it to show its work, what sources were used, which companies were used as precedents, where did each sentence come from, what were the judgment calls, what were the standards used, and what's included versus excluded. And then that'll allow the lawyer or the accountant to assess the quality of the output and then make a judgment call as to what to do with it. And I think, the human is going to be the one that continues to sign all the sub-certifications as part of the disclosure controls process. They're the ones giving the legal opinions and the ones that'll be blamed if something goes wrong. So I think it's really just about getting comfortable that, we still own the output and aren't outsourcing it completely.
that makes a lot of sense.
I don't think AI can't practice law legally, at least not yet, and I don't think any state has allowed that. So I think I always tell potential customers that the AI isn't practicing, like you're still responsible for it.
So that may be this may be a good segue to sort of drill down into some of the capabilities, the granular capabilities we're seeing in this space. Peyton, I want to turn it over to you really quickly. What capabilities are becoming possible today that weren't practical even a few years ago? And maybe if you can walk us through some of what you built at Green Shoe and then sort of answer the question as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think and here's a little kind of screen share from our app. I think one of the most important things isn't that AI can draft things for people. I think it's what we've kind of been talking about this whole conversation. It's that now we can continuously process large amounts of information at a scale that wasn't practical before, right? Like, so you see here, you can set up kind of like your AI agents to go out and look at what's happening in your peer group. So every time something happens with one of my peers, I know I understand that, and I not only understand that, but I also understand how it's relevant to my filing or my client's filing. So I think that's probably the most impressive thing. I think historically, a lot of this monitoring and analysis took a lot of manual effort. And it took a lot of effort that was done kind of on the quarterly cycle. And, it involved a lot of rushing to get a lot of this work done. But now you can just do it in the background all the time. And again, kind of what we've been talking about, you have all of the information you need surfaced to you in an easy way. So all you really need to do is make judgment calls. So, the drafting becomes essentially the judgment call in the disclosure world. So I think that's much bigger. I think that's where things are going, and that's what we're building for at Green Shoe with our products.
So that captures the sort of current state of technology where it's at within the context of AI and disclosures. Let's fast forward. Let's say years from now, it's 2030. What do you guys see sort of becoming the norm for AI within the context of disclosures? How do you see it play out in the law firm as well? Is it a situation where you're going to be leveraging potentially the same number of associates, fewer number of associates? Just wanted to sort of forecast into the future as to what you guys think the world will look like as these advancements take place.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So, I think, AI is, going to it and is already, I think taking away a lot of the lower value and kind of higher hours work on the SEC reporting side. So I think, it means that, the successful outside counsel is going to be the one who not only understands how to effectively wield AI and integrate it into their teams and their workflows, but who can leverage their experience to provide, sophisticated legal advice with a practical business-oriented mindset. And that's really where the real value to clients lies, I think. And, AI can help with the data inputs to that, but it's not going to be a substitute. And, as you previewed, right, that of course has implications on pretty much everything that we do, from how we train our junior attorneys to how we're measuring performance, to how we're thinking about recruiting the next generation, even to law firm billing models. So I think we're going to see a lot of dramatic changes in the future to all that, as we operationalize it more and adopt this, AI first mindset and integrate it into everything that we do.
I mean, from the folks, I'm not at a law firm anymore, but from what probably the most relevant thing from what I see at law firms and what we try to build is as we build out our products. As Aaron said, a lot of the like low hanging fruit work is going to be done by AI, but a lot of that work that junior associates do is how they learn how to do their jobs, right? And that follows you up into the ranks as you become a senior associate and you become a partner. So I think it's really important for firms, accounting firms, for companies, even public companies, even to use AI in a way that can actually still teach people how to do their jobs, right? So build in explanatory like outputs in the AI's output. Like make sure the AI is explaining how something happened, or even we've even experimented. This isn't in the product now, but we've even experimented with making the like forcing someone using the software to actually sign off that they read like the explanation, right? Like almost almost like a game. Like you have to click it and then you can go to the next stage. Not sure how that's going to work out, but I think that's just something that people should be thinking about. Is we don't want to lose kind of that teaching moment once we start moving into different AI workflows.
Yeah. So my students have a lot of anxiety about this. You can probably imagine. And we have seen our students are still placing and getting jobs, but one interesting trend, we have seen more students going straight into general counsel's office, straight from law school than we used to see. So speaking just more for the accounting side, where again, I do think this is going to depend somewhat on the PCAOB and the SEC, because as of right now, you have a lot of accountants, Big Four, who are saying, look, we can't use various tools because of PCAOB auditing standards. And then you have the PCAOB saying, we don't think we're blocking you. And there seems to be some sort of disconnect. But if we can get that disconnect actually resolved and allow some of these tools to be rolled out, my hope is that we can just have a much more continuous audit process. I think we could have a situation where, one of the visions for one of the companies that we had come present in my class and share their tool is that you have your external, tool basically connects with the company's systems. They sign something saying, these reports will be just delivered monthly. So they just automatically get uploaded to the tool. The tool does, continuous monitoring and continuous auditing. You don't need sample selection anymore. And then, over time, each month or whatever it is, it just goes through and provides an output. So you have much more, not going to be real-time audit, but a more continuous audit process that, changes the way we think about, things like sample selection, which will then also change the way we think about internal controls and, how we sort of communicate all of this. And I think, there's a lot of potential with that. I think it would really ease coordination issues between your auditor and the client, where you can have an auditor who's waiting around for documentation and annoying everybody as they're like asking for stuff all the time. And you can eliminate some of that friction. And you can just get better, more timely, output, which I think a lot of investors would value.
That Colleen, I would love to go back to the comment you made about student. Um, would love to learn more about, and maybe you could share your thoughts on just the sort of feedback you're receiving from the student that you have a relationship with, right? Because AI, I mean, obviously, it's creating a lot of anxiety. So, where are they looking to work? I mean, if we can sort of talk about that briefly, because you see advancements in legal tech every day. You see advancements in other verticals. So, are they running towards it, running away from it, somewhere in between?
Our students are mostly running towards it. And I would say, our students are really focused on one, as a junior, sort of what can I do to make myself valuable? And two, it's one thing if you're using some of the legal tools that are like easier to validate and they can just kind of check, does this case actually exist? But if you're using, a tool that's a little bit more workflow oriented, that's perhaps harder to validate, then they have a lot of questions about how is this tool actually built? How can I really, know that I can trust the way that this tool is designed? What sort of controls are in here to make sure that it doesn't, if a number is missing, it doesn't just make up a number or make up a name. It actually tells me this information is not included. So, how do I really validate what I'm using? So that's actually the most common question that I feel like I've gotten is they're trying to understand more the nuances of like, what is a quality product that I can actually rely on and what is one that, was kind of hastily put together.
Got it.
I will say I've had more students this past year ask me if we can add a class about how to actually start up a law firm than I've had in any of my time here at Stanford.
You said starting a law firm?
Yeah, we've got a number of students who want to do AI native law firms now. I think they're very enthusiastic. They're definitely, there's some anxiety, certainly, but they're overall very enthusiastic. And I think the general view in the legal space, and at least here, maybe not everywhere, but here,
Right.
is that it's not necessarily going to lead to mass unemployment in law as
Right.
much as it's going to expand access, and that we have tons of folks who are pro se right now. And maybe, we can actually get representation for some of those folks. And, we have a subset of students who want to go into big law, but we also have a subset of students who, want to go and work with those folks who are, right now pro se.
Yeah.
And think that, maybe they can expand access to, actual legal representation by using tools.
That's really interesting. So as a follow-up question, and Aaron, you can opine on this as well, because you're seeing, the law students go to the law firm and then matriculate. Do you guys see value in those partnerships? Let's say, for example, with Harvey, Lagore, et cetera, because essentially we're now at a point where the students need to be trained on these tools. It could also include a solution like GreenShoe, but part of the barrier that needs to come down is sort of getting, like you said, educated on how to use these tools, what they can do, what they can't do. So could you guys speak to sort of this new trend in the market where some of these solutions or platforms are partnering with these law schools so that they can become very familiar? It feels almost like the second coming of like the relationship with like Westlaw, right? Where you get in early, you understand how to use it, you get hooked, and then you sort of use it over the duration of your career. How are you
You got to
guys?
pick a side. You got to pick a side too. You got to be Westlaw or you got to be
Or like,
Lexus.
You can't be both.
Whoever gave the best swag, that was
That's
what
right.
people.
Right. So how are you guys seeing those? I mean, are you seeing those partnerships materialize, and are they valuable at the law school? And Aaron, do you see some of the new recruits, the new associates come in and have a sharper skill set because of it?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing our junior associates come in wanting to lean into AI and kind of recognizing that, that is the future. None of the junior attorneys come in and say, oh, I don't want to use Westlaw and Lexis. I want to go spend hours and hours in the library looking at books on my own without using technology. No, they recognize the benefits of it. And, and that, they can leverage it and to own their careers. So we're investing a lot in our own training, right? And so we have enterprise agreements with a number of AI tools, and we're having AI institutes for all of our lawyers to really dive deep on helping them understand the tool. And then I think, from just an individual team perspective, and this goes to the training point, that Peyton and Colleen mentioned, making sure that, on any given, work product, we make sure our junior lawyers are kind of understanding, well, what are we looking for? Why are we looking for it? How do we want to deliver it to the client? Because if they don't have that context, right, there's this risk that they don't get trained like they did in the old days, right? And they don't develop into the more senior lawyers that exercise, judgment calls. So we're really leaning in heavily to that. But we're seeing, people come in kind of already, everyone's already using AI on their phones and computers,
Right.
the consumer-facing apps. I think it's still a bit early to kind of assess, are the juniors more AI competent coming in because of these partnerships at the law schools? But it does seem anecdotally that, they want to lean in and they're capable of leaning in.
Just to put a plug quickly for Stanford. So we have access. So we've thought a lot about this. And we provide all of our students with access to Harvey, Legora, LexText, Rhetoric, and we're working, I believe, with Filevine and Clio in our clinics. So, in our sort of initial legal writing class, it is no AI in that first quarter. And then afterwards, they have mandatory AI exercises where they do have to use the tools and ideally understand the difference and the distinctions between some of those tools. Also, when students do a clinic, in the clinics, they have a lot of use of various AI tools there. So from what, within different classes, different faculty are very different. We've got some that are full AI. We've got some that have gone back to oral exams. So there's a huge variation. But it's something that I think we've really tried to focus on and thoughtfully integrate into the curriculum.
Yeah, that's based on your feedback, it was very different from my law school experience. That was back in let's not even give the date, but it's very, very different than when I was in law school.
Well, maybe you also had oral exams.
Exactly. I was going to turn it over to some questions that we have from the audience, if you guys don't mind. I think the one question that really stands out is, what is the biggest misconception organizations have about applying AI? So that could be in the context of disclosures or other areas, but what's the biggest misconception? What's the main thing that you just think organizations just fail to see?
Could you repeat that? I had a little trouble with my.
Yeah. The question was, what is the biggest misconception organizations have about applying AI? What's sort of like the biggest misconception that you see? Maybe it's something that they think should be true but isn't, and
Yeah.
it's sort of a very surprising moment, because I think a lot of organizations, or depending on how you look at it, there's this sort of laundry list of things that they expect AI to be able to do. That could be in the context of disclosures or other verticals or adjacent spaces. Um, but we have a ways to go. So just wanted to see if you guys could frame the conversation, talk about like some of the misconceptions that organizations typically have when they're trying to really adopt AI.
I can speak to that a little bit. So I think, and a lot of it's because I think we're still early in like the AI adoption cycle and like where the real value is going to shake out. I think we're still deciding that in real time. So I think one of the first kind of use cases for AI was just kind of a general chatbot, right? Like you ask the AI questions and then you get an output. So then people started citing things. It's kind of grown from that. I think uh, a lot of organizations um, get kind of stuck into that chatbot loop instead of thinking about kind of the use cases that AI can do in terms of monitoring things, um, surfacing information that's relevant to decision making, right? And a lot of these things don't exist in like the chat form. Not saying chat form is not useful, but I'm saying a lot of the enterprises actually want things that you can't really do in the chat interface. So I think that's what we're seeing now. That's what we're working really hard with some of our customers to help develop systems that can kind of do things in the background for them that are still super valuable, but allow them to do their work like kind of concurrently. That's been our biggest kind of point of understanding in the last like 5-6 months. And I think that's the AI industry is kind of going in that direction, at least in the enterprise as well. So.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, yeah, I would agree. It's still kind of early innings on the adoption cycle. And I think kind of we're still in a place of, trying to dispel a notion that, you can just, put something into the chat box, press a button, and magically you've eliminated all these hours of work. You get to the right result. It's 100% off the bat. And, the first roadblock you get where something's wrong, and then you just think, the tool is completely terrible, right? And people overreact. And that's not the case, right? It takes work to kind of understand, like, how do we wield these tools effectively, and kind of, the more time you put in up front to develop, the right workflow or the right prompting, right? And sometimes you have to iterate on it, the better, the output will be. And so really trying to train everyone that's using AI to kind of break through that barrier, and so that they feel, competent enough to move swiftly kind of between models and between tools, and use it to get a better result, and not just, stop when it seems like maybe you didn't get what you want. I think of that as more user error than tool error in most cases.
Kind of quick on that. I remember it was like 2 years ago when I was at my law firm that I was at. I was one helping kind of decide what AI tools we might want to pilot. And I remember, and most people in the room hadn't heard of an LLM at this point, so it's moving fast. But we were going through some contract review, and the AI, like you were saying, Aaron, it was doing this awesome job, but it got like one thing wrong, and everyone in the room just like, okay, this is stupid. Like, let's, it was kind of funny. How far it's come even just 2 years ago, but I totally agree. I think it takes the adoption isn't just the technology needing to get better, it's also bringing users in a way that meeting people where they are.
Yeah, that's great insight. It seems like we've come a long way. I think that sort of concludes the conversation today. Just want to thank you guys for taking the time out to be a part of this webinar. Thank you for all the folks out there attending today, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.